Our balance sheet accounts, we call assets, liabilities, and stockholder equity are balance sheet accounts. Why? Because they're summarized on the balance sheet. Does that make sense? That's just a name we give them. So you'll notice that our assets increase with a debit, decrease with a credit, and our liabilities and equity are the opposite. Okay, this helps me memorize it because this is just something you kind of have to memorize. Okay, these rules, because I know what assets are, and I recognize that because assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity, like they're on opposite sides of the equal sign, that they're opposite from each other. For my brain, that works. So if I know assets increase with a debit and decrease with a credit, then I know that liabilities and stockholders' equity are the opposite, and I have all three of them memorized. That's how my brain grabs onto it. There's actually in Canvas, if you go to additional study resources, there's a couple of videos from the internet that several students have told me really helped them lock down and remember these things. A couple different strategies that people have put out there. This is so hard. If you just Google it, or I mean, go to YouTube and search it, there's a lot of people have made videos about how they memorize these things, even though it's not really that hard. But in the beginning, it feels super hard, like anything new, right? Then we have our income statement accounts, revenue and expenses. They're called income statement accounts because the income statement summarizes revenues and expenses. And revenues increase with a debit, decrease with a debit, and increase with a credit, and expenses are the opposite. So they increase with a debit and decrease with a credit. Again, why? Because this is what makes it all work together. When you guys get a little deeper in, maybe we'll take a moment and stop and say, now you can see why. But right now it's best to just sort of learn that this is how it works and work with it. Does that make any sense? Like, have you ever had someone try to explain a card game to you? And you're just like, you just gave me a bunch of rules and I don't know. But then you play a couple hands and you're like, oh, okay. And then if they explain the rules to you, you'd be like, oh, and then you could ask clarifying questions. So I really think it's the same way, is learn the rules, start working with it, and then and then your brain starts to open up to like, this is why this all flows together. Dividends, they behave just like expenses. So they increase with a debit, decrease with a credit. They're given their own little page. I bet they feel special. All right, one more concept, and you'll see it on that little cheat sheet I gave you. I call it a cheat sheet, but you won't be allowed to use it on the exam. So what I would say is use it with your homework and then as you get more comfortable, try to do debits and credits without the reference sheet, right? Maybe we'll call it a reference sheet. That's just a nicer term. Precision of language, right? So we have the normal balance, and you'll see, if you look on your paper I gave you, that the normal balance is always on the side that increases the account. So asset accounts have a normal balance on the debit side. Expense accounts have the normal balance on the debit side. Dividend accounts have a normal balance on the debit side. Liability accounts, stockholder equity accounts, revenue accounts, they have a normal balance on the credit side. So the normal balance really just means, if I were to look at an account, what would I expect its balance to be? And the answer is I would expect it to be positive, because we don't actually have, it's weird, like how do you have negative cash? I mean, especially when you're accounting for liabilities separately, right? You would just have a positive liability and a zero cash or something like that. So the normal balance is always the side of the account that is the side where it increases. Why? Because we would expect, it would be normal for the account to have a positive balance, okay?